In developing the project, I wanted mostly to present the documentation. So that's the green book you see there. In tandem with that, I had this idea about mental health diaries, not knowing really what mental health diaries were, but I felt I wanted people to interact and become engaged with the ideas and the concept behind the project. I wanted to encourage people to have thoughts about how to write differently. So the 4 other books in the collection, so the blue is the box that they go in, and the other 4 books I call mental health diaries, and I'm sure you've come across that now. I hadn't at the time. So the first book, just to take you through a couple of pages, is that, sorry, right, had a techie thing there for a moment, it didn't move on to the next slide. We're there now. So these are 2 of the pages from the documentation book, and as you can see, it's a very small book. If I haven't said that already, it was A6, and I worked very hard with wonderful Davina Kirkpatrick, who helped me to edit down everything to 50 words per page. Now, anyone who knows me, that's quite something. It took 3 months. It was a mammoth task of reduction and making it short. And within that process, it was very interesting to choose to reveal what I could for the purpose of sharing parts of my story in order to illustrate ways in which our stories are there to be retold and to be changed. So I made personal choices about what might go in, you know, one short snippet from my diary, and within that you can see the format for the project, which is the three photos of the performance process at the date I read them, and then the text underneath I think of as interpolated texts. So interpolated texts are used in different ways, but they come from different directions, so they're different points in time. Some of the texts underneath are, again, personal comments from 2017, when I was reading. Some of them are bits of research, quoting other people, ideas that I found along the way. And some of them were actually written last year as I reread the rereading. So for instance, you've got on page 14, a little comment there at the bottom. Telling a story about events does not guarantee that the traumatic of memories will be laid to rest, but it's a step in the right direction. Without stories, some memories become frozen. The past is paved with words, carefully assembled, piece by piece, until the whole story can be revealed. Well, they often go off in different directions, stories, and they are mosaics. They're mosaics in our minds. And by the end of the documentation book, you are being encouraged in your reading to look at yourself, because it's undergoing an ongoing, unfinalizable process, and it's waiting to be rewritten, exploring all the people you have been and can be. It's part of understanding and enjoying multiple incarnations of self, and is one of the most fascinating pursuits of your life. Be safe, and please take what you need and throw away or burn the rest. Now, we don't have to burn what we have. One of the interesting things for me was that I stopped keeping a diary in the same way. I still write, but I don't want to create lots of writing that I might have to deal with. So one of the things that the project did for me is to look at different ways of writing. There we go. on to the next slide. So here we've got two of the mental health diaries, and the mental health diaries are called thus, but they are really little notebooks, and they are small so that you can you can carry them around with you. There's not a lot of space for writing in them, but the hope is that you're actually jotting things down and then rewriting things continually. And the project feels very much like a rewriting process, that we're continually trying different ways of exploring different parts of ourselves. So the first one you see there is the little black book of catharsis. Of course, the idea being that you can put all your bad stuff in there. You can write all the bad things that have happened to you, trauma, guilt, disappointment. And if you want to, it comes with a handy match so you can burn it. The Smoke and Mirrors book next to it there, the grey one, it acknowledges that we're many different people. We hide and we distort many parts of ourselves. Truth and history is variable. So this book encourages you to explore all the people you've been, all the people you can be, and to embrace those people, to find and feel empowered through realizing that we are not just one individual self. I think it's so invasive, this idea that we are a unitary self. We are many different people throughout our lives. And the idea of creating notebooks that you encourage you to write the different people you are is hugely appealing. So I'm just going to show you the other two books. We've got the body book here. Oh, by the by, I don't know if you noticed, but I did make an effort. I've got some lovely match earrings, which go with the matches on the cathartic book. But of course, yeah, I haven't done anything else apart from sit in front of a bookshelf. I don't know, we'll discuss later maybe if other people manage to do something to bring their diaries to this meeting about writing. So the body book, well, originally the body book was going to be all about performance and live art theory, much of the stuff that I'd accumulated over the years, because performing the self and the body has been at the heart of my arts practice. And it is through the body that we often reveal the hierarchies and inequalities that are projected onto us from outside, the expectations to be perfect if you're a mother or in whatever sphere of life that you are working. And it's particularly problematic for women. So my practice of trying to make visible these inequalities has often been through the body. So that's what I thought the book would be about. But in actual fact, in considering that it was going to be a mental health diary, I found the most useful source and inspiration to be from Bessel van der Kolk and his The Body Keeps a Score. Because of those mind and body correspondences, how do we look after ourselves without looking after our bodies and the connections between the two? And the last book is The Golden Notebook. So the reference to Lessing's novel is unmistakable. And her story of Anna Wolf, the main character, is one that Anna Wolf keeps many different coloured notebooks as she writes of the splits and problems in her life, and that it is a very difficult book to read, but I love the concept. So I obviously had, in some way, when I read it 20 years ago, held that idea in my head, and then found myself thinking, well, that would be an ideal book to be the final book of the four notebooks that encourage us to write all our good stuff, all our best selves and all our best stories as a place to collect those things. It's very different from the idea that it's the place where we bring everything together. It's much more that it's a positive place for us to deposit the best things and go back to them perhaps when we're not feeling so robust. So diaries and processes of writing the self. They enable us to see things and ourselves and other people in a very different light. One of the things that my son Phoenix wrote about, which was rather wonderful, I realized he understood the project from a context of writing so that other people within your support groups, your comfort groups, can understand you. So that means you've got to be brave enough to share them. But I think that's a lovely thought from Phoenix about the fact that he understands me better through reading some of the project and not all my diaries. So the project is all about this idea, and full of quotes that I found, which were all about these stories in our lives, that we can live ourselves into our stories, that we can choose what those stories are. And Rushdie here sums it up beautifully, because we need to have power over our stories, and power to retell them, to rethink them, deconstruct them, laugh about them, and change our stories as time goes on. So the project not only tackles dealing with past diaries, but also different ways of writing now. And this is a very resonant project during the last turbulent year that we've had. And I think that talking and writing, I don't know how everyone feels about that, but talking and writing have been some of the supports for many of us in terms of our sanity. I want this project because there are only 100 signed copies of a limited edition print. This project is online, and it's very important to me that the book, this launch here tonight, thank you for joining me and everyone else, but this project is promoted through the book, but ultimately it is the concepts and the ideas behind it that I'm really passionate about, that I think it can be a huge help for us all to know that there's no one way of seeing any particular moment in time, that diaries help us to remember, but they can also false foot us, that we can actually reconceive and refigure the past through looking at it through a different lens. Thank you. I'd like to stop screen sharing now.
Great, thank you, Delpha. A very provocative talk, actually. There's been some fabulous discussion in the chat room about whether people could or couldn't have the courage to burn their diaries or their journals, and whether that's something that's cathartic, or so you've inspired quite a few people to explore that idea a little bit more. So thank you for that. A lot of people are very interested to know more about the books. So thank you. Okay, so we're now moving over to Davina. So Davina's going to be talking about the self and her project Quarantine Conversations. Can I just please remind you all to keep yourselves on mute for the duration of the talks, and if you do have any questions, then please pop them in the chat box, and we can all collectively share and reply to those together. Okay, here we go.
Okay. Oh, thank you. So I just wanted to before I talk about the quarantine conversations thing, Delpha mentioned that my involvement with the Theatre of the Self books was as an editor and typesetter. So I helped her pull those into the shape and form and size that she desired, because we'd had lots of conversations, because I just recently co-edited a book, a much bigger academic book called Artful Collaborative Inquiry, Making and Writing Creative Qualitative Research, with Jane Speedy, Jonathan Wyatt, and posthumously Sue Porter. So I'd had to relearn InDesign in order to get text and images to work together. And I'd had quite a few lunches with Delpha where I'd talked about the joys and the frustrations of doing that. So it kind of evolved out of those conversations. But it was a fantastic project to be involved with. So my artwork and my academic work kind of inform and influence each other. So I thought I'd talk about another diary project, which is called Quarantine Conversations. This started in the first lockdown with the artist Carol Laidler, who's based at Spike Island in Bristol, Emeritus Professor and artist Jane Speedy, and myself. And it was a way to find intimacy in virtual spaces to mediate the effects of social distancing. So we have a history of collaborative narrative inquiry and a part of CaniNet, the Collaborative Artful Narrative Inquiry Network. So we Zoom each week for an hour and a half, and we've created a method of chatting, reading or showing images to each other. Sometimes we've written or made prior to the meeting, immediately writing our response to these, and then we do that writing of the response for 15 minutes, and then reading these to each other, and then reflecting on these by chatting again. So we email each week's writing to each other, and Carol collates them and then sends them to Bronwyn Davis, Sheridan Linnell, and Susan Gannon in the east of Australia, who are doing a similar process. So once every 6 weeks, then we all meet up on Zoom and read and write together. So this larger group we call Arctic terns, after the birds that migrate between the far-flung reaches of the northern and southern hemispheres. We meandered into this project, trying to make sense and nonsense of the lives we have led in lockdown, in quarantine, in collusion, and of the ways we are imbricated in wider events, movements, and turns in the world. We write and make art in response to our lives, these wider events, each other, and to the thoughts, feelings, images, moments that form drifts and arcs between us. We read our work to each other across these vast distances and send each other copies of our artworks. At times, undone by grief, the relational material practices that we've developed help make the pandemic livable, endurable, even at times hilarious. We make our way through the pandemic vividly with words and paint and other materialities. The ostinato of virtual meeting, listening and responding creates richly interwoven thoughts, ideas, images and emotions. And I thought I would just read a small section of my writing that will be presented at the International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry in May. We're going online with it rather than face-to-face at the University of Illinois. So this is just a small snippet. Meanwhile, indoors, my dad writes his life story for his grandchildren. I notice all the casual touching in the movies we watch each evening, the jostling crowds, the nearness, the proximity of bodies in space, and miss it. My dreams are Technicolor productions, brim full of festivals, jostling crowds, bodies pressed close to one another, alternative sensorial theatre, and sex in all its sticky, messy, odorful delight. All the forbidden pleasures of life in a pandemic. I crave sweetness upon waking and last thing at night. What is it a substitute for? This may contribute to my disturbed sleep and wild confections of dreams. Lack of touch due to social distancing has heightened my awareness of tactility. I take this yearning for touch into the studio, finding a way to reformulate my focus and intensity. I work with some of the walk images from Gwythian Towers the day before lockdown, but also with what is absent now and for the foreseeable future, not going to the beach, missing the wide open vistas of a literal landscape where Ulf the red dog can run free, breathing in the saline-infused air and hearing the repetitious rhythm of waves against land. My favourite waking act is to nuzzle Ulf. I put my head on his chest whilst he is lying on his back and kiss him, inhale his ginger nut biscuit smell. He makes his happy dog noise in the back of his throat as his paw rests on my shoulder. I feel embraced and that all is right in my world. We often lie like this a while. If he tires of the proximity first, he gently kicks me with his back leg. I raise my head and he sniffs my breath and licks the tip of my nose. It is an act of interspecies communion that has become vital this year. I love the simple, uncomplicated communication, so different from the relational tussles between humans. Kindness is a key that unloosens the ever-tightening knots of reaction and response. Remembering that can sometimes be challenging. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. I have planted a tree named after the matriarchal Scandinavian tree spirit, Hilda Moya, Mother Elder, a powerful, potent pagan symbol that of course had negative Christian symbolism. According to folklore, I could burn the wood to see the devil, as the sap and open structure of the branches makes it spit and scream. But by planting one, I ward him off. I draw it once planted and decide to evoke 2nd century magic. By layering over the words, abracadabra, I will create as I speak, written in the form of a triangle. Maybe I'll make an amulet to ward off disease, even if Defoe scoffed at this symbolic practice, applied to doors during the Great Plague of London. I'm trying to find ways to be playful with my fears of an ill-timed easing of the lockdown rules. Creativity is vital to whatever utopian vision I have for the future. Art enables us to look again, experience something differently, mend and make anew. And my response to the others' reading. I read yesterday how people's relationships are straining and splitting because of differences with the ethics of response to COVID, social distancing, vaccination. Trying to find perspective. How to find a way to say, this is me, I hear you, when you say do that. I feel, do this. We are evoking older magic, Hollyoak protection, nulla object relations, shape sifting into the old shape of flashing wings, dragon trees, bluebells, deadheads in the lavender, holding at bay for this moment in our continuous present the white noise of COVID, remapping our universe, teetering on the edge or falling forward into the void, playfully holding the live wires of no touch, eat or repeat, hiding in plain sight. Do I enjoy my life? That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Davina. That was really powerful, actually. Really resonated about touch and how much that absence is affecting all of us during this lockdown period, and how how that absence of touch is impacting on all of us. It was a really powerful talk. Thank you, Davina. Okay, so now I would like to introduce Dr. Polly Hudson, who will be writing from the body and movement.
Thank you so much, Helen.
Sorry.
I'm really moved by your writing and your speaking of your writing. Thank you, Davina. And I think it's a really nice segue actually into what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to refer a little bit actually to something that Delpha said at the beginning, which was take what you like and leave the rest. I've just realized I'm going to set a timer so I try and keep to time. I'm also aware that we've been looking at a screen potentially for 45 minutes. That's tiring. So I invite you to do whatever you need to right now. So if you need to stand up or you need to lay on the floor and listen, you don't need to look at the screen. And I would say I've always written poetry and stories as a child, and expansive, perhaps self-indulgent diaries as a teenager. I've got boxes and boxes of them in that loft and on my bookshelf behind me, actually. And it seemed natural and unassuming a step to morph into creative artistic journals as an adult. And they map my history and my development as an artist and a person and serve a number of purposes. They track and record my processes, and they offer possibilities for material that I did not recognize was there under the surface somehow. The writing takes on a variety of forms. I've developed a style of journaling that is uncensored and potentially without fear. Developed also from stream of consciousness writing during a long-standing practice of authentic movement techniques and Skinner releasing technique. So the writing technique was also developed in my own studio, dancing accompanied by sporadic drawings sometimes. It's a form of writing that's poetic and laced with metaphor and feeling. This image that's on the screen now illuminates how writing also appears in my dance performance practice. This is an old piece from 2003. This performance of it is 2004 at Warwick Arts Centre. And the piece concludes with a camera over my shoulder as I engage in a stream of consciousness writing, which is projected in real time onto a large screen at the back of the space. The audience simultaneously witnesses me as performer in the immediate visceral process of writing and also see the words appearing. In this way, letting go and process enters into performance and the images and words spill forth. Writing from movement and sensation requires us to let go somehow of preconceptions of what may arise in those words. Sometimes there aren't any words, so drawings or marks appear instead. Or perhaps the words arising may be nonsensical, seemingly random. In this kind of letting go into writing, we may find images from our body and from other places inside ourselves fall onto the page. Our bodily experience somehow becomes integrated and elucidated through our writing. And Delpha asked me to speak about writing from the body, and I realized that perhaps it's also interesting to notice how words and language land in and on our body, how we receive ourselves and how we receive words. So with that in mind, I invite you to take a moment to notice and to receive yourself right now. And that might mean you want to close your eyes for a moment, or it might mean you want to lie on the floor or sit with your back against a wall, somewhere comfortable. We might notice, perhaps you might notice what parts of yourself are in contact with the earth or with another surface, mapping that in your mind's eye for a moment. You might notice which parts of yourself are not in contact and they are instead in contact with the air or with clothing. And perhaps now let's take our awareness to our breath. And we don't need to change or alter our breathing in any way. We can just let it be. So perhaps with this small increased awareness of sensation, we might receive ourselves more fully. It's also come up in conversation this evening about touch and about how, for many of us right now, that's something that is not so present in our lives. And we can also practice self-touch to allow a kind of dropping into our body. So we might just take a moment, perhaps to, if you feel like it, you might place both of your hands on your skull. And just noticing the weight of the hands on the skull. And then perhaps taking one hand to the heart and one hand to the belly. And the heart is located just below, if you go map below the collarbones, the center of the sternum, just to the left. And maybe one hand on the tailbone or the base of the spine and one hand on the belly. And then just let the hands rest anywhere you like. We could perhaps go to the next slide, Helen, but if you are lying on the floor or have your eyes closed, you don't need to look at this because I'm going to read it to you. Miranda Tufnell, who's a wonderful dancer and artist and choreographer, about writing about writing from the body, tells us, listening through the body brings up words and images we did not know were there. We let them find their own way onto the page, playing with the feel of their resonances and associations. We welcome whatever words and images arrive onto the page. The images that emerge gather their own sense as we write. Our writing may be fluent or clumsy, abundant or brief, poetic or plain. We have to assume it will be the necessary expression for this moment. To stumble or to stutter may be as eloquent and as necessary as to sing. And in Delpha's red book, the body book, which they're all beautiful, but this one particularly resonated for me. She says right at the beginning, after referencing the body keeps the score, in her own words, then Delpha says, making a bridge between the mind and body will help us bring our stories and our inner experience together. And that really makes a lot of sense to me because I work in somatics and with the notion that the body mind is not a duality, it's not a split. Our stories are stored in our body, in our cells. In fact, science is catching up with that. We know that in movement practice world and in the art world, we know about stories that are stored in the body. And in more recent times, the last couple of decades, science has been proving this in terms of cellular memory and even intergenerational trauma memory. Delpha also proposes that we can notice what we see, smell, hear, and feel when we are writing. So perhaps when working through the tasks in Delpha's beautiful books, we can acknowledge that from a deepened sense of sensation, a knowing that the language of the body will speak if we quieten enough in order to hear it. And that therefore it will reveal itself to us with delicacy, perhaps, and also with fierceness. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. I'll sit down again now. Really, really provocative talk again. What resonated with me was to stumble or stutter may be as eloquent and as necessary as to sing. Beautiful, beautifully poetic, and yeah, it really resonated with me. I'm not sure what resonated with everybody else, so perhaps you could put your comments in the chat and we could hear more about it. I haven't seen much of the discussions that have been happening as I've been screen sharing, but please do share. A lovely message there from Jackie, all in one being, our thoughts, feelings, body and behaviour. Thank you for that, Jackie. Fabulous. Okay, so now I'm going to move over to the fabulous Renee. Let me get my screen ready. So please can I just remind you all to pop yourselves on mute. Sadly, when I'm screen sharing, I can't mute, so I do apologise. Actually, let me see if I can do it here. I'll be able to do it.
Right. Okay, hi, my name is Rini Crouch and I write as part of a writing partnership with Alison Tangy, who's here tonight, I'm pleased to see. We're called Blue Stocking and we create poems and spoken word pieces in collaboration with fine artists and other performers for galleries, festivals, and so on. And our work obviously has shifted greatly in response to the various lockdowns. We still work collaboratively in wide open spaces when we can, on moorland, beaches, or across the expanse of Zoom. Currently working on the body of paintings we're writing in response to. And 2 years ago, we wrote a piece about mythological coastal creatures. So sirens, mermaids, selkies, a half woman, half seal. And I'll write with that voice, the voice of the selkie, at the end of my little 10 minutes this evening. So my personal work is creative writing and journaling. And for me, they often overlap and flow into and affect each other. Forgive me if I stumble and stutter this evening, because I'm very moved by the other speakers and very relaxed after the mindfulness from Polly. So I'm snapping back into being together right now. During the last year of university, 20 years ago, my father was diagnosed with a terminal illness and he died a few short months later. And we had a shared love of the sea and of swimming together. My degree was in writing and performance art, and I created a final piece which I called Tongue Tied, spelt T-I-D-E. Really, I realized I didn't have a language for my grief. And I ended up at the end of this particular project writing words in sand that would be washed away. And it was a ritual really of coming to terms with loss and with the ephemeral, the transient. And I chose the words to be carved into sand or harvested them using a tide timetable, which I will describe shortly. If we could have the first slide, please, Helen, with the handwriting on it. My current journal writing and my writing practice in general often have echoes of this 20-year-old work, tongue-tied. There are a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, the journal that you hopefully can see in the image was given to me as a gift a few years ago. And the lines that you write on the lined paper are actually formed by the complete and minuscule printing of The Wizard of Oz. In effect, you're writing into it, you're writing onto it around other language. So every page or two has an important quote from the novel highlighted in red by the publishers. And instinctively, as I started writing my journal in it this year, I instinctively left gaps, as you can see, around the highlighted red lines, just because I felt I wanted to leave space for those in the page within my personal writing. In the example on the screen, I was delighted to find that after I'd written my words, I then read the quote highlighted in red and discovered an interesting parallel. So I had written, "Here within my home, stray dogs no longer roaming, the light can get in." And then after writing that, I read the quote, which says, "Dorothy was once more filled with the hope of getting home, and the Scarecrow and Tin Woodman were glad to be of use to her, while Toto ran around them and chased the moths and butterflies, barking merrily all the time." There seemed to be a beautiful interplay there between the Wizard of Oz and my diary entry of that day. So in this way, these two bodies of writing, a literary classic, reprinted into a lined notebook, and then my daily pages and my ramblings, they begin to form a relationship. And I'm very interested in words that I haven't personally generated to enter and inform my written work. If we could have the second slide now, please, of the timetable, that'd be lovely. So my second inspiration currently is my recently acquired love of cold water swimming. Having always loved the sea, my naturally addictive nature has become hooked on the crisp shock of the water and the fiery tingle when you emerge after your swim. It is a sensual, immersive and connective experience. I've often used words from outside to make waves within my writing. I may ask a friend to give me, say, 15 words, anything they like, and then I weave them into a much longer piece. These are often words that I would never have chosen myself, even words I might dislike or that are jarring to my usual writing aesthetic. But these odd words and phrases from external sources invite opportunities for change, randomness, spontaneity, and challenge within my writing practice. They cut through or blend with my usual written flow. In effect, they offer little unexpected ways to incorporate new words, new utterances, and therefore new meaning into both text and self. I saw a correlation in my experience of wild water swimming, the way water moves in response to a foreign object or the external forces of temperature, tide, weather, or swell, how it eddies, rips, flows. As well as water's fluidity and responsiveness, cold water swimmers adapt to conditions both for their pleasure and for safety. And in this way, my daily practices of swimming and writing and journaling started to inform and overlap with each other. Much like tongue-tied 20 years ago, where shock and grief left me feeling lost for words. Over the last year, I became aware of so many people's and my own sense of vacuum and isolation. We have been surrounded by phrases like the new normal, words that seem chatty and innocuous, but actually carry social and emotional change on a profound level within them. For sanity, creativity, well-being, I wanted to branch out from the feeling of isolation into texts, poetic language, as well into the world of bodies of water. So in both cases, grief of 20 years ago and the recent colossal experience of COVID, I have found comfort and inspiration in something both constant and yet constantly changing, the sea. And often I take the numbers of the tide times of a particular day and I apply it to a book at random. So for example, today's tide times in Penzance are 02:22, 08:03, 14:47, and 20:25. I go about applying these numbers to a book that I pick at random, which today is The Fabled Coast, Legends and Traditions from Around the Shores of Britain and Ireland, which is a beautiful, quite mythical, watery tome in itself. I might go to those numbers, 0222, and go to page 222. And then the time 0803 translates to line 8, third word. All sorts of different ways of harvesting texts with seemingly random numbers taken from the tide. I did this today in various orders, and I found the words to, century, saint, sailed, disciples, and, for, turned, marine, brothels, and then. Now, these could just be words picked at random in all sorts of different ways. Snippets from a radio program, 10 words from the crossword you may have just done, the crossword you did today, yesterday, or any of hundreds of different texts or books could have offered up infinite selections of words to weave into my writing. Anything can generate these external outside ripples of word and text. In my own practice, I find harvesting these words refreshing and direction changing and challenging. They add endless variety into my absorbing flow of written work. There are, of course, plenty of days when the flow comes entirely from within or through, but I would invite you to try this way of finding words, seeking pieces of text, sound that can be snuck into or immersed into your own writing or art practice. So Just a reminder, my words were 2 centuries, saints sailed, disciples and for turn marine brothels and then. And I'd like to end on the poem that I wrote today to include those found words, written as a selkie. I often feel centuries old and centuries young, the ghost of a seal, watching the disciples falter at the water's edge after the ship has sailed, and feeling more at home here in the blue. I have never been a saint and would happily live a life of sin to avoid their fate. For here in the cold depth, I am safe and unseen. I am marine. I have a fish to eat and a powerful tail. I have turned from the traps of solid ground. I have no legs to be spread in a brothel's bed, and water keeps me safely tucked from flames. Thank you.
Thank you for that inspirational talk. I was thinking I'm going to apply that to the book that I'm reading at the moment. Where is it? By Dr. Pete Lovett about dance psychology.
Fantastic.
I thought I'm going to use the Norfolk Tide Times to do that. Beautiful.
Brilliant. Lovely.
Thank you very much for that inspiration. Again, lots of conversation in the chat. Lots of people interested about the cold water swimming, about your courage to do such a thing. Yes, I think we're all this temperature that we're feeling at the moment. Yes, not something that I think I could do, but I know we spoke about this before, and you said that you felt that you couldn't enter into cold water swimming initially, and then it was a process that you did over time. So fabulous, thank you. So what I'd like to do now is to open up all of our speakers for any questions. So if you do have any questions, can you please pop them into the chat room? And if you'd like, we can just invite them out to everybody, or if you have specific people, whether it's Davina, Delpha, Renee or Polly, we can ask those questions directly to them. It was a beautiful poem. Yes, you're right. Thank you. Any questions? Delpha, would you like to?
I'd love to leap in at this point. Thank you so much for the sharing different ways that we write. I wondered whether or not there are people here that might like to ask questions, or in fact actually share the way that they write at the moment, or the way that they might think they might write. So let me just put that out there, please, everybody. If you'd like to have a think about that, you can put it on the chat, or maybe put your hand up if you're quite a Zoom person, or used to using Zoom.
The little reactions, you can use your hand raise option.
Yeah, one of the things in the chat earlier I noticed after I'd finished speaking was that people thinking about this issue, if you've got lots of diaries over a lifetime, what to do with them. And I'm not saying that it's right for everyone, but it has been for some people really a resonant thing, that a very practical thing actually, not to leave it all behind. You know, what do you do with all of that stuff? It's so personal. And I know that I've had friends who have said, I wish I hadn't had to read my parents' diaries. So I think it can be quite a practical project, as well as have these different concepts about the way that we write.
Can I just cut in there, Delpha? We had somebody comment earlier on just talking about that very subject, just saying how they wouldn't want to leave their diaries as a burden for their family. So yes, not actually wanting to destroy them themselves, but feeling like that process had to happen so it wasn't a burden.
That's right. I think for me, not only the process itself was very good for me psychologically, practically, it also has really changed the way that I write, and especially in the last year, I have to say I have not written in the same way. Somebody else in the chat brought up, I think it was Vital, if I've got your name wrong, I'm so sorry. But he brought up, or they brought up, that it was that also visual diaries are really important. And I actually keep more of a visual diary now instead of the writing. I still write for mental health, but I also might do what one of the books proposes, which is make a morning writing, a morning eye, where I wake up in the morning and I write down what's on my mind rather than all the things that might have happened in the day. So if any of you have got anything just simple like that to share, please do.
There's a question actually which we could come to in a moment. Gemma has asked, do we write at a specific time of day? But just before that, I wanted to pick up on what you were just saying, actually, Delpha. I remember when we first had this conversation about what you were doing with this project, I'm not sure if you recall, but I was horrified by the notion that you would be burning your diaries.
You remember that now? I'd forgotten.
And it's really interesting for me because I'm not a hoarder. My house is pretty, like, I don't hoard things, but apart from diaries and letters, I have every single letter that has ever been written to me since I was a child, in boxes, all the letters that my grandmother wrote me when I first left home, pen pal letters from people in America I'd never met, all sorts of things. And then a load of them got destroyed because they were in boxes and they were in under the stairs in a house that was very damp, along with 3 or 4 boxes of diaries. At the time I was devastated. Now it's all right, but the rest of my diaries are in the loft now where I live, apart from artistic journals from the last kind of 8 years, which are on the bookshelves behind me. But I did notice that I ripped out and destroyed a few pages from some diaries when I got married, that were not about my husband. Interesting, isn't it, that what those parts of ourselves, I feel like I'm blushing, but what we want to keep secret, or what's dark, or yeah, interesting as well about the notion either of it being a burden to family, but also some other people have commented in the chat that they feel it might be really illuminating. Gemma said, I think it could be a really great way to get to know family. So it's interesting, isn't it? Do you think we should answer, shall I answer that question that Gemma asked, a specific question about time of day?
Please do.
For me, when I was younger and I used to keep a diary like today I did, and I feel like this, and that was always before I went to bed. I don't do that anymore. So my writing now is out of, trying to think of times it's not, pretty much out of movement practice, and also out of my gardening practice. I have a kind of ecosomatic gardening practice that I haven't talked about today, but a year-long project where I've been writing from the body and sensation whilst engaging in an urban allotment. So it doesn't really have a specific time of day. That's the answer, Gemma, not a specific time of day. But that's artistic journaling and writing rather than a diary. I don't think it's a diary anymore.
Would any of the other speakers like to comment?
Yeah, thank you, ladies. It's all really, really fascinating, and it's good to see you all. It reminds me a bit of my stepdaughter gave us the books with, you know, a book you can give to your mum or dad or grandparents to write about themselves, and, you know, who was your first boyfriend, you know, what was your first car, and people are giving these out as gifts so they can find out more about their parents and the next generation and their grandparents. But I think it's much more interesting to have a diary, because then you really know that person. And so my question, well, that's in terms of the family thing, is that I write some poetry, but I write it's really good when I'm in a grief-stricken place. And so do do we need to be in a place of grief or going through something to get that writing out, to stop and analyze? Because when everything's happy, I don't, and going fine, my life is like skin deep. But when it's, I'm full of grief and stuff, I write more. So is it the experience that motivates you more? What you're holding up, Polly, sorry, is that?
I think it's a really good question. I'm holding up Delpha's golden book because she talks about that, about actually does it all have, am I right holding up the right one?
Carry on, tell us what you were going to say about the golden notebook.
I'm holding up the right one. That's about writing from about
a good place.
From a good place, because often, I think you're right, Sam, it's like trauma or challenging things can be cathartic to write about, but actually how about the everyday or the boring or the
ordinary,
which actually is really interesting.
It can be. I think a lot of my diary research, which is obviously a tiny amount, you know, the amount of diaries available to be examined from every direction, and books about diary writing and about autobiography, because this is a very important aspect which I had to very much check whilst engaged in this project, because what we know about a lot of women's lives is from diaries, that we rely on these artifacts, the histories from women's diaries, because quite often they are not actually recorded in other ways. So diaries can be really, really important. So why would one consider destroying any of them? And I think it comes from a place of saying, well, many diaries historically are written from the viewpoint of somebody trying to aggrandize and, you know, big them, you know, a bit like biographies tend to say how great someone was, not so much now, but they used to historically. So there is this tension between this need to record people's lives and also the need to kind of edit it down. My mother wrote copious religious diaries. They do not refer to anything emotional, scarcely anything useful. You know, they really were things like I fed the chickens and I went to church. So it's really looking at not only how we write, when we write, but these differences, actually challenging ourselves to, if we want to write a diary, if it is all that emotional bullshit, because we need it as a little bit of a prop, that is something that we can actually, we don't treasure that. We can just say that was useful, get rid of it. But we do treasure and keep the best moments. So thank you, Polly, for pointing that out. I have got the books here in the flesh, you know. I just did to point that out because I didn't use them to read from today in my first and undoubtedly last book launch.
Lovely. We have a question from Giles. Please, if you'd like to unmute yourself, Giles. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Good evening. My name is Giles. Thank you for putting this on. Really enjoyed it. It's been a wonderful, surprisingly interesting evening. Thank you very much, all of you, for doing it. And thank you, Davina, because you dragged me here. I'm up in North Norfolk on the coast. So it's nice just to be around and to see some different faces. I use Zoom a lot, so it's really nice to have something different. Talking about, I hadn't got any questions really, it was just appreciation, but actually just reflection, because you made me think about my dad's diaries, because my dad drank himself to death in 2006. And then to be given his diaries from my great aunt, because he was in Bristol at the time, and to kind of reflect on those. And as he knew, as he was drinking himself to death, that actually these was the, including with you know, it was more of a journal, I suppose, but actually receipts from the butchers for his last Christmas, because he knew it was his last Christmas. So the turkey and the ham that was bought, but also his kind of, as he was getting more jaundiced, as he was, you know, approaching death, but actually it's no, I regard those as valuable, really, that actually it helped me not understand, but sort of, he was seeing death in the face. He kind of knew what he was doing. So you reminded me of that diary that I have of his, which is quite painful, but actually, I can kind of piece together his life, because I didn't understand him. I didn't understand what he was doing to himself. But then that kind of made me also think about my journals, because I've kept a journal for I don't know, ever since I left art college, really. So sporadically, I'm going to say. I can dip into that, but actually realize somebody said about having different coloured journals, and I thought that's quite exciting, really, because all of my ones are mostly black, or they're just pads that I keep. But that was because a ring binder means I can carry on writing in it, and there's more pages in it, but it's not small enough. I haven't really come across a journal, so I liked your idea of having the small books. Really, I think that's a nice thing. But then, in my experience of my life, some of my journals, some of my writing has been used against me, and that's quite difficult. It can be weaponized, I think. So it is quite difficult if your diaries, your journal, your personal stuff falls into the hands of other people. And I have an uncle also whose diary got him into deep doo-doo. And that was really unfortunate. So I think these things you have to be careful with them. And then reflecting on what Delph was just saying about, I think, about losing some of your diaries, or is it Polly? Losing your diaries because of damp, because they're under the stairs. And you think, oh no, that's awful, because that's a part of your life that's just gone to damp. It is gone.
Yes, thank you, Giles, for all of that. That's wonderful, and that can happen, that you can lose everything. I think that part of the process of revisiting diaries, I'd used them in artworks before. Many years ago, I'd created some texts from my diaries, some sculpture from those. But so because my practice works with lots of different media and time-based work, I think the thing about the diaries is revisiting them. And what can often happen is we're just storing them for some future. And it's that process of saying, you know what, I've got time, I'm going to make time and revisit them. How are we doing for time, Helen?
We have 7 minutes.
Oh, right, 7 minutes, everyone.
But Polly would like to comment.
I just jump in. I just realised something, actually, Delpha, about when you were just saying about revisiting, that in order to write my PhD in 2005, whenever it was, I spent about a year revisiting, because it was by portfolio. It was historically about my work, my performance practice and film practice over 25 years. And I spent about a year reading old diaries, artistic journals. So I have revisited. It's very interesting. It's very illuminating.
It is.
And I didn't burn them.
And I think a lot of artists might just go back and re-edit. I think the dramatic act of burning was incredibly cathartic, but not all of the diaries were burnt. I have to say that my son Phoenix is now here. Hi, Phoenix. My other children couldn't make it tonight. They've all got young children. But my daughter asked for the diary of the year of her birth. She wanted to keep it. And that's what happened. It's full of stories about the children, and I kept all of that. So it's about that process of, like you say, Polly, and many of you here, if you have the time, it's fantastic to go through all of those journals. I have a very dear friend, Catherine, who couldn't make it tonight, who has it's an art project in itself, going through her art journals and logging them. Can I thank everybody for coming tonight? Very quickly, sorry, I don't want to run over. Especially Helen, who is the best the hostess with the mostest, who's just been absolutely brilliant, and especially for this. So actually, can we just all give her a clap? That's
For my technical errors, thank you. Clap away.
No, you were brilliant. I could never, with my technical wizardry, never have succeeded. And especially to everyone who came along tonight. I do look out for the project online. Obviously, you can order the books. They're going fast. I don't actually have that many copies left. Not much of a book launch, really, but there are some left. And they'll be popping up. A few copies will be popping up online because everything's online at the moment. I put a few links in the chat if you want to have a look. So I do hope you'll all go away and think about how you are writing yourself and how you can use different ideas from the project to, I don't know, live into your best stories. Helen, do you want to finish off there?
I just want to say thank you for everybody for sharing lots of personal information in the chat, and it was quite cathartic for me sort of to explore the chat. I don't know whether anyone else was fully reading everything, but yeah, it's been quite more emotional than I realised actually. So I'm pleased that I didn't have to speak too much, but yeah, thank you very much everybody for your honesty and for sharing with us today. I have recorded the session. Let me just stop the record now.